I can see Ronald is here, Noah's here, Eric Hartwell is here from Facebook, Timothy is here. So thank you so much, everybody. This is awesome. So basically, I'm just going to take a few minutes here and try and give you some insight into better developing a practice plan for your daily practice plan. Maybe it's a weekly practice plan. Everybody's different that way. And I can't tell you specifics on what to practice either because we're all different. But I will say that there's two things that I always think about, and then we'll get into the points that I've got. Number one is consistency. And number two is flexibility, which is really when you're practicing sometimes when I'm talking to students about stuff, they'll say, well, I was really in the zone with whatever it was I was practicing, but I had to get all my other stuff in. We tend to think, we're supposed to practice 752 things every single day. And maybe we are. Again, everybody's different. But I think there are times in your life where you might be practicing something and you're in the zone, and that's something we're going to talk about. And you don't want to leave it. Like you're really feeling it and it's really working that day. And I honestly believe that sometimes you need to sacrifice the regimen for the inspiration sometimes. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into that. So as we get started here, we're going to be talking about really 4 different tips, although there is a 5th one I'll mention. The first thing we're going to talk about is setting realistic, and that's the key word, realistic goals for your daily practice or your weekly practice that can improve your motivation and your self-discipline. So why do I say daily or weekly? Well, some people like to do the same thing every single day. Okay, their routine is the same. Every time they grab the guitar, they do the same thing. Some people like to set up a weekly routine where maybe on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays are your what we'll call your regimen days. And your regimen days are the days when you're practicing fundamental elements, right? And then you might have, Tuesdays and Thursdays or Tuesdays and Saturdays where you're doing, creative days. Those are the days where you work on writing or you work on improvisation or something like that. And then maybe Sundays are, music theory day. Everybody's different that way. And again, you can see even by me mentioning this that, your routine might be vastly different from this because, you like to practice whatever it is every single day, which is perfect. You might have, 20 minutes or 30 minutes of a particular routine that you like to do every single day. And then the rest of that day, you work on whatever. And this is the trick here is trying to figure out what is the whatever, as opposed to just sort of picking up the guitar and going. And again, don't get me wrong. If you've got something that's working for you, that's great. I'm just saying if you struggle with trying to figure out something, developing an actual routine might be a better way to go versus just grabbing your guitar and going, well, let's see what happens. And again, if that works for you, that's wonderful. But let's break down this. So setting realistic goals for practice can improve your motivation and self-discipline. Okay, setting specific and attainable goals. And this is the big one, is what I wrote underneath there, is break down goals into smaller, manageable chunks. Okay, don't overwhelm yourself with A, way too much information, or B, setting goals that are extremely out there, in terms of attainability. Try and set goals that are closer to home. And then you can keep building that as you go. But the one thing that I find with a lot of players is that they just get frustrated so quickly. Number one, they don't have enough time to practice. They're not sure what to practice, that sort of thing. And so you need to do some self-assessment. You really need to think about where you are in your guitar journey. What kinds of stuff are you able to do? And everybody here right now, Time Prophet, Werner Martin, Alan, Hacko, everybody. Doesn't matter who you are. Okay? You've got skills on the guitar. You have to define those skills, and then you also need to think about where your struggles are. So keeping track of your progress and building on what's working for you, and then also identifying what you're struggling with and why you're struggling with that, okay? Maybe your chops aren't up to par. Maybe you're having a hard time with your picking, or you don't know enough about your fretboard, or whatever it might be. I always think, and we're going to get into these are part of the tips, is giving you some other ideas, but being aware of who you are and where you want to go, and also where you struggle, are very, very important. Not just randomly, practicing all these things because you read it in a magazine or a teacher told you to do it. And again, I'm not saying that those things aren't wrong. They might be spot on, but you don't know unless you've actually thought about it. So setting specific and attainable goals. Break down those goals into smaller, manageable chunks, okay? Create and stick to a practice plan and a schedule that is working for you, okay? If you try and set up a practice plan that's 2 hours long and you don't have 2 hours to practice, you want to, that's not realistic. That's not setting a realistic goal. You have to create something that is realistic. If you've only got 30 minutes a day to practice, you need to be realistic and honest about what you're going to do with those 30 minutes. What's the most productive thing you can do? And again, I might overlap here because I'm just talking, but I think about maybe the student that is joining a band. So now this student has 40 songs that they have to learn for this band. That becomes a realistic goal. Even though they want to work on sweep picking and whatever, and I hope they can. But if you've joined a band, you now have an obligation. And your obligation is to learn all the material that you're going to be playing with this band and try and get as good at it as you possibly can, because now you've got a real life thing happening to you, right? You are working on some songs for a CD that's going to be coming out, right? So you're really focusing with your band, or maybe you don't have a band, maybe it's just you recording all the parts. That becomes a realistic thing that might take precedence over your sweep picking or whatever it might be, right? So you have to be flexible in your practice routine in that when things arise, you need to now deal with that. If I get hired to do session work by, whoever, I get hired on to do some solos for whatever it might be. No matter what it was I was practicing yesterday, now I have a job to do. I've been hired to do this thing. So the criteria of what my practice regimen is going to be is going to change relative to this situation that I now am in. Maybe this situation requires me to write a solo that is focusing on some different kinds of techniques, things like that. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Focus on key areas that need to develop and save time to produce better results. Again, all of this is focused on the same thing, which is you defining what it is, where you are, what you need, and what you're struggling with. And not just shooting for the moon, and there's nothing wrong with that, but realistic goals that you can attain are really important, okay? So tip number 2, ways to make guitar practice fun and productive includes being willing to go with the flow when you are in the zone. Let me explain this, okay? And I'll make sure that these tips are written underneath there too so you can find them, but wherever you're watching this. So ways to make guitar practice fun and productive includes being willing to go with the flow when you are in the zone. And what I mean by that is, if you're practicing, it's a regimen day, and you're practicing your regimen, but it's just not, you're not feeling it, right? For whatever reason, you need to practice your scales or your speed picking or licks or whatever it might be, but you're just not feeling it. It feels like it's a creative day today for whatever reason. You're down, something's on your mind, or maybe you're just in the zone for creativity. I always encourage people to go with the flow. If you're feeling it that day, why deny that just because you feel obligated to do regimen because it's a Tuesday? You know what I mean? That's different from blowing off regimen because you never want to do it. That's a completely different thing. It's going with the flow. Or maybe you need some inspiration that day, so maybe you're working on a particular song that, you've always loved and you've just never really learned, or, whatever it might be. Sometimes we need that motivation and that inspiration to keep us on track. And some people might look at that as, well, you're not being as productive as you should be. And maybe that's true. Maybe for that day that's true. But if it keeps the guitar in your hands and you're working on things, it's better than, man, I had a sucky practice day and I don't want to play and I'm not good and everything was terrible. If you can turn that around by just switching up what your regimen is that day and going with what you're feeling that day, being in the zone, I think that's very, very important. Okay? So number 3, target fundamentals that you find important to your growth. You, not the magazine you read or the teacher that said or the social media post that said, right? What works for you? I have had literally thousands of in-person guitar lessons in my life. And, I do meet and greets and things like that where I'm talking to people all the time, and everybody is different. We're not all working on the same things because somebody's, focusing on harmonic minor or Phrygian dominant or something doesn't mean it's for everybody just because somebody's, sprouting about it on social media. You need to find what works for you for your guitar growth, okay? Here's just some very generic things I wrote down, like scale and fretboard work. The more you can see of your fretboard in whatever situation, pentatonic, diatonic, whatever, arpeggios, whatever it might be, the more you're able to really see and dominate, the more freedom you have when it comes time to write or improvise or whatever it might be. The more you can see those pathways around your fretboard, I guarantee you that the easier things become. But then that also then says, well, we have to have the ability of being able to physically play moving around that fretboard. That's a second thing, right? So be aware of these things, that those kind of larger picture things can really make a big difference in your playing. I always call it playing with blinders on. When you look down at your fretboard and, you're jamming with somebody or something and it's not all coming to you. And then you're thinking in your mind, well, when I was at home, I could do all this. But now that I'm under pressure, I'm not seeing it all. Well, if you go back to my first tip or whichever one I was just talking about, that's the reality of things. And the beauty of that is it's shown us now our limitations and what we need to do to fix that. So I think learning your fretboard and being able to see things across your fretboard are very, very, very important. And then your ability of being able to play. Now, when I was younger, I played a lot of technique stuff, lots and lots of it. I don't do as much of that nowadays because I'm in a different place with my playing. I'm glad I did those things, don't get me wrong, but when I was working on my technique, what I was lacking in was my ability to play melodically. This is just my story. But because I was working on one thing so much, I wasn't working on something else. Now that's okay, because at that time, that's what I was really focused on. Now I'm focused on something else, and it's okay. You need to do the same thing. The bottom line with all this is you can't wake up every day and just make yourself feel guilty and feel like you suck because you're not getting all this stuff done. You have a life and you only have so much time in a day to work on the things you want to work on. And the whole point of this is for you to refine that in a realistic and logical way. But at the same time, what I'm talking about right now is being okay when things have to change for whatever reason. And then, of course, this tip number 3 is dialing these things in, whether you need scale or fretboard work. Maybe there's a different style of that you want to focus on. Maybe you've been playing blues and you want to play rock, or you want to focus on something else to give you some new ideas. Maybe there's techniques for you. Maybe you do want to be, learn about speed picking or sweeping or string skipping or 3-note per string patterns or whatever it might be. That's perfect. That doesn't mean it's perfect for the person standing next to you, right? Or the person in the chat below you. Right? And that's okay. It's different for every one of us. Music theory, songwriting, learning songs. These are all different kinds of things that you need to think about to find what's better for you. Time Prophet said, I'm better at blues than I am at rock, but I like rock. There you go. That's exactly it, right? So Time Prophet needs to figure out how to implement ideas to make that connection to rock and roll for practice, right? Now, again, I don't have the answers for that, and just one chat isn't going to fix that, but that's something for you to think about. So tip number 4, find ways to stay inspired to continue practicing. Going to a show, joining a positive community like we have at Guitar Zoom Community on Facebook, being part of something that makes you want to play, makes you want to practice, makes you want to stay engaged, right, is very important. Social media can be a very negative place, but it doesn't have to be. So finding ways to stay inspired, talking, communicating, going to shows, recording. Even if you're not great at X, Y, or Z, just recording yourself, like on a iPhone or on your computer or whatever, just having fun, writing songs. Maybe you're learning some new licks, or maybe you're working on some new scales or some different theory stuff, or you're just jamming with a buddy or a neighbor or a relative. Whatever it is that you need to do to stay inspired. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong. There are people out there that are very inspired by a 4-hour regimen every day, and I think that that's amazing. Okay? But that doesn't mean that the next person who's playing 20 minutes a day can't stay inspired as well, right? We have to find our own path, and that's what's very important. And again, one of the problems with social media is we are inundated with new ideas all the time. Every time we go on YouTube or Facebook or whatever it might be, there's new ideas. It's kind of like going on Netflix and there's always new series or something. That's great, and you might get to those. But don't just keep shifting gears all the time because there's something new coming in. Right? If it's something that you see that you could implement, as we talked about earlier, in a realistic and attainable way, then that's great. If it's something that you see and you go, oh man, I wish, it's kind of like, I wish I was an astronaut kind of thing. That's great. And maybe you put it on the back burner and you save that link or whatever it is, but don't get so distracted that it completely throws off your game. Okay? So, bonus tip, don't get overwhelmed and expect to do everything, okay? That's what I'm talking about right now, is don't get overwhelmed. It wouldn't just go, well, I want to do all of this. I like the attitude, but sometimes it can be very detrimental because it throws us off our regular practice routine, and we're just trying to do anything and everything. We're just throwing things at the wall. I always think of it like clouds in the sky. Sometimes it's just random clouds all over the place, and sometimes it's just all connected, right? And the problem with the random clouds is that they're not connected to each other. And if we think about our practice that way, or our guitar journey, the problem is that when we go to do our thing, we jam with friends or in our band or songwriting or whatever it might be, improvisation, to jam tracks or anything. We've been practicing all these things, but when the time comes to actually play, we can't connect these things. And that's a problem. We have to find a way to interconnect these things, and some of those clouds might just be too far off, and we can't make a connection. And sometimes you got to let them go. Even though it might bum you out, sometimes you got to let them go for something that's closer and more attainable that you can actually grasp onto. Okay? So, just think about that a little bit as you go through this thing. And again, this isn't anything different that I haven't been saying the whole time, but baby steps to the next logical thing, just like I'm talking about with these clouds. Really start thinking about you, your skills, and what you're struggling with, and the things that you're learning, how they're going to directly affect who you are right now to keep pushing the level of where you are, as opposed to just randomized things, okay? So anyway, hopefully that makes sense to you. Take care, stay positive, keep practicing, and I'll be back again for another Monday Guitar Motivation next week, okay?